everybody, and welcome to Back to Basics, Common Sense Law with your host, Preet Gill. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, I would love the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm an attorney in New York and a partner at Shariak, Bowman, Anderson, Gill, and Kadachnikov, LLP. Although we try our very best to bring topics that cover the entire United States, please note that we are a New York and New Jersey-based law firms, so sometimes when we do talk about certain things, they may be state-specific. So, for those of you tuning in for the first time, I would like to recap some of the interesting things that we talked about for the last few weeks. We talked about the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, also known as the FDCPA, which is a law by the federal government which basically protects you as the consumer. One of the things that we discussed is a mortgage. How can a bank, what are some of the things a debt collector can do in a foreclosure action? The first thing we talked about is that they are limited in how much time that they have to bring a foreclosure action against you. That was 6 years. We also talked about they cannot send you any sort of a notice saying that your entire mortgage is owed and that you're behind in payments when in fact you have been making timely payments. So if any of these things happen, or if you want more details, please check last week's show. But I just wanted to recap, there are some damages under the FDCPA if those debt collectors make any of these violations. The first one is that you may actually be able to get all the money that you paid your defense attorneys in the foreclosure action, or you may even get your entire mortgage free. So I think this is a perfect transition into today's topic, which is bankruptcy. What is bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is a legal way to say bye to all of those debts. Sometimes all of them, sometimes not, but it's just a way for you to know. So those of you who are watching who've already filed for bankruptcy, or are ashamed, or feel the stigma, or feel burdened by your debt, I have a very interesting fact for you. In 2018, more than 750,000 individuals like you and I filed for bankruptcy. So today, we're going to cover some of the rumors that you may have heard from your dentist, from your doctor, from your chef, your neighbor about bankruptcies. And why don't we take the time to talk to some specialists that know what they're doing. So stay tuned. I have a great guest that knows bankruptcy in and out. We'll see you soon after the break. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Back to Basics, Common Sense Law with Preet Gill. Before we went on break, I discussed with you that we're going to go through some of the rumors or misconceptions that we may have regarding bankruptcy. So today, I'm going to have a special guest with us, Mark Anderson, who is a partner at my firm, and he specializes in bankruptcy. Mark Anderson, thank you so much for coming to our show and being a part of this.
Thanks for having me, Preet.
Anytime. So
glad to be here.
I'm going to jump right in, okay? I'm going to ask you a question.
Sounds good.
I have a house, but I have a lot of debt, and I want to file for bankruptcy. I heard that I can lose my house.
Not true. In a lot of instances, you get to keep your house, provided it doesn't have too much equity.
No. So what do you mean by equity? What is that?
That just means the amount of money that you have, that the house is worth after you take account for the mortgage. So if a house is worth $500,000 and there's a $300,000 mortgage, there's $200,000 in equity left.
I don't even think I need to explain that because you did a really good job. So can you tell us how much equity in New York State, I believe, and I'm not a bankruptcy specialist, but every state is a little bit different.
It is.
Right? Okay, so what about New York? What is the...
New York has a really favorable, what's called a Homestead Exemption, which means that you get to keep up to $165,000 in home equity. And if you're married, you get to keep that times 2. So it's $330,000 in home equity.
If I have a house and my husband and I are filing for bankruptcy together and we have, let's say, $300,000 in equity in our house, so we can keep our house?
All of it.
So they won't sell it and give us the money?
That's right.
Okay. I heard some other things, some rumors that they will seize my bank accounts, they will seize my car. You know, sometimes people have assets, but just because they have assets doesn't mean that they're not struggling to pay their debts. In
most instances, you'll get to keep everything you have. And in fact, even if you don't have a house or a car, you can keep up to $13,750 of anything in your bank account. So
and this is New York State?
This is actually federal.
Oh, this is federal, okay.
So nationwide, you would get to keep that amount, but you can also utilize that in New York.
I just want to summarize really quickly for our viewers that every state, even though bankruptcy laws are generally the same, each state is a little bit different with what kind of exemptions you may get, and it depends on where you live, and that's the state that's basically going to cover the rules. So I also heard that taxes are not dischargeable in bankruptcy.
In many instances, that is true, but that is not true. You get to keep, or you get to discharge some of your taxes, provided you fit under a certain conditions, which is that it has to come from a tax year that's over 3 years ago, and it has to have been filed over 2 years ago.
Okay, so you have to. So that means if I owe taxes and I want to discharge them in bankruptcy.
Income tax.
Income tax.
Yes.
Okay, so that doesn't include. Okay, so income taxes. There are certain rules that I have. So I can't just say, oh, I forgot to file, and now I have $1 million that I owe to the IRS. And it has to be over 3 years old. Okay, so that means that since we're in 2019, it has to be taxes from
2016.
2016, and I must have at least filed those tax returns 2 years ago.
That's right.
Okay, so if I file for bankruptcy, does this affect my job?
No, actually, there's a lot of employment statutes that prevent you from losing your job if you file bankruptcy. In most instances, you cannot even be prevented from getting a promotion if you filed bankruptcy before.
Okay, so and that's a topic that comes. A lot of people discuss. They're in my office. We could be talking about other things, and they'll say to me, "I can't file for bankruptcy because I'm afraid I will lose my job." And what Mark Anderson is saying today is, if you file for bankruptcy, okay, that there are laws that protect you from losing your job or getting a promotion, with a few exceptions here and there, right?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's like usually when you're involved
If you
with money.
run a bank, you probably shouldn't file bankruptcy.
That makes sense. Okay, so I also heard that that bankruptcy affects your immigration status.
No, in most instances it would not. Unless you haven't paid your taxes, which you have a lot more knowledge on, then it should not affect your immigration status. In fact, if you don't have a Social Security number, you can still file for bankruptcy.
I just want to repeat that. If you do not have a Social Security number, you are still eligible to file for bankruptcy in the United States, which is really important because there are a lot of people out there that don't have Social Security numbers and they have a lot of debt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they're very scared.
I think it's a very scary process. I also heard that, what was it? Sorry, there was another rumor that you and I were talking about earlier.
It was student loans.
Yes, student loans. I also heard that you cannot discharge student loans. Is that true?
In most instances, that is true.
Okay.
Unless you can demonstrate what's called extreme hardship, which usually is if you're permanently disabled and unable to work for the rest of your life, you can establish that you can discharge that in bankruptcy. That would be your extreme hardship. But in most instances, people are not able to establish that.
I mean, I know a lot of our viewers have children that are in medical school, law school, just doing a PhD. So that's a significant amount of student debt. And what Mr. Anderson is saying is, unless you can pretty much show that you cannot, is it not work at all or work in that particular field?
No, you have to be able to not work at all.
So basically you have to be in a coma or disabled.
Very disabled or in a coma,
I mean,
unfortunately.
what if I'm a surgeon and I can no longer operate? So there are no laws right now that protect me from my student debt, and I can't discharge that.
You
in
may
bankruptcy.
want to go into teaching or go to Barnes & Noble.
Now, what if the student loans were paid off by a credit card?
That's an interesting question. And if that happened and the credit card company allowed that, which I doubt.
I doubt that too.
But if it did happen, that would be an unsecured debt that you would be able to discharge in bankruptcy.
Okay. I also heard that bankruptcy, when you file for bankruptcy, especially in New York and in the Eastern District, that, and I just want to tell your viewers that there's somebody called a trustee that has been appointed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that those guys are very harsh, and sometimes they will go after your family members. Is this true?
That's not true. Actually, when you file a bankruptcy petition, the only thing that they are worried about is your property. And so that could be your bank account or the property that you have or anything like that. But remember, we have to go back to the exemptions. If it's exempt property, which most of the time it is, you get to keep everything.
Okay. So now, are there other, what kind of bankruptcies are there that, that can help our reviewers? They can decide, I think there's different types depending on how many assets you have.
It's actually mostly dependent on your income.
Okay.
And so the two most common types are Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Okay. Chapter 7 is if you're under a certain amount of income. And if you fall below that income, then you're eligible for it, which is wonderful because you get a complete discharge of all your debt. Your credit report will show up as zeros for all those creditors.
And actually, that's a good point. So the biggest misconception that I have with people is if I file for bankruptcy, I'm ruined. My credit is gone. I'll never be able to open up a credit card again. I have to pay cash. And that's scary because, how do you move on after a bankruptcy?
So what I tell people is most of the time when you file for bankruptcy, you're in extreme amount of debt as it is. And so your credit's already in the toilet. And so by filing bankruptcy, you're actually creating on your credit report a whole bunch of debt that's at zero. And you can actually start to rebuild that credit in a very short period of time. Whereas if you didn't file for bankruptcy, it would still it would show up as owed for forever until you got rid of it or paid it, which is impossible.
But what if there's times when debt collectors will ask you, if you owe $1,000 and you pay us $500, does that affect your credit in any way?
When you pay a debt collector?
But you pay less than what you owed and due to a settlement?
It may affect your ability to get a discharge if you pay them.
Right.
In fact, it's almost better in bankruptcy to not pay them because that might be what's called a preferred payment. So if you do pay a creditor, it may affect your ability to file.
So basically you're saying that if there are times when it's just better to file for bankruptcy and get a fresh start and your credit, and you'll start seeing how far after filing for bankruptcy do you know that your credit starts increasing?
I've seen it with my clients in as little as 1 year. If you do what you need to do, which is that you open up accounts and you keep on paying them off and you don't act frivolously, you should be able to get your credit back on track, and it'll be much higher than it was before you filed in a very short period of time.
Another rumor is that if in fact, let's say you file for bankruptcy, okay, and you have your credit cards, and that's the only source of how if you're in such poverty that you can only pay for, let's say, your food with your credit card, are you allowed to do that?
Can you pay for is the question?
For basic things, right? If you're near and you're about to file for bankruptcy, is that something that...
Within limitations. I mean, they don't want people to starve. So, I mean, if you had to use your credit card to pay for some food, they would probably allow it. But usually what happens, if you're not supposed to use your credit cards, it usually shores up a lot of money because you're not actually paying off those credit cards. And so every single month you're going to have a lot more money coming in that you don't have to pay back out.
So you probably get to, have a lot of clients that come in that are talking about basic bankruptcy. They want to know, what are their rights, what are their responsibilities. Do you sometimes feel that some of your clients are hesitant to file for bankruptcy? And if so, usually why is that?
Usually it's a moral reason. Like they feel like it's something that they should be doing, when in reality it's something that's provided in the Constitution for you to do. And it's not much different than filing your taxes. And I do think that the reason that a lot of people don't file bankruptcy is because the industry that's collecting all of the money is creating the stigma.
Right. And just so sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
But one of the things that a lot of people don't know is if you do file for bankruptcy, you're not allowed to refile after, what is it?
If it's a Chapter 7, it's 8 years.
Okay. So that means for 8 years, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons why your credit goes up, right? Because the debt collectors know.
Right.
So I just want to bring it in for my viewers really quickly that it's not shame to file for bankruptcy. It's not shame to to ask for help. When thousands of other companies do it, the federal law gives you an opportunity to get a fresh start, and it's not a fresh start that you can do every single day. So why not rebuild your life and take control of your life? Mark, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
We're also going to have you back next week because Mark is going to walk us through all of the procedures of bankruptcy so you know what to expect. And we'll see you next week.
All right, looking forward to it.
And I'll see you guys after the show.
Thanks.
Welcome back, and thank you for watching the show. But before I let you all go, I just want to recap some of the very important things that we discussed with my partner, Mark Anderson. So the first thing that Mark told us was, if you have assets and you're thinking about filing for bankruptcy, there are many exemptions, depending on the state that you're in, that you are able to keep equity in your house. That means the amount you owe in the foreclosure versus what the value of your house is. You can keep your car, you can keep some money in the bank account. So, you really need to go to an experienced bankruptcy attorney and tell them, what do you have? If you have elephants, tell them about the elephants. If you have a boat, tell them about the boat. And remember to tell them about assets that you have anywhere in the world, not just the United States. So you can save some of your assets, okay? The second thing that we talked about is bankruptcy is a way to finally relieve all that debt and rebuild your life. That means in about a year, you will notice that your credit is going to start increasing, and you're going to be in a much better spot as if you had not filed for bankruptcy and you have all these debts that are being listed and shows that you're still owing it. So there's really no shame in taking back control of your life, because once you do file, for example, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and you're discharged, that means that your debts have been cleared, you are not allowed to file for many years, okay? The third thing that I really wanted to talk to you guys about is filing for bankruptcy cannot affect your immigration status, okay? But I will give a little disclaimer. If you're not paying your taxes, that's a different story. But if you filed for bankruptcy and you're doing everything that you're supposed to do, you cannot be deported, you cannot be refused your citizenship, okay? So that's something that you need to know. Second of all, a lot of people feel that if I file for bankruptcy, how is that going to affect my job? Well, I have news for you. It's not. And in fact, there are laws that protect you. And if you file for bankruptcy and if you've been refused a job or a promotion under certain circumstances, maybe, unless you're running a bank like Mark said, okay, you cannot lose your job. I mean, you could lose your job for other reasons, but definitely not for bankruptcy, okay? So thank you for sitting through and watching and having this conversation with us. I always invite you to call in live if you have any questions, if you have any ideas on what you want to hear. Our number is below. Please leave us a message. If you have any further questions, you can always call our office. And next week, we're going to bring Mark Anderson back to our show, and he's going to talk and walk us through what's from this first step of filing the bankruptcy application all the way to the very end, so that you understand what to expect and it's not going to be so scary. So thank you. Good evening. I'm your host, Preet Gill, and I will see you again next week.